February 1943. Central Tunisia. Dawn breaks cold and colorless. The wind moves sand across shallow foxholes, whispering against canvas and steel. An American infantryman tightens his gloves around a long metal tube resting on his shoulder. It feels heavier than it looked in training. New paint. Factory clean. Untested. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, engines growl, low, steady mechanical. German tanks are moving. This weapon was meant to stop them. Only weeks earlier, it arrived in wooden crates stamped with fresh ink. Command called it revolutionary. A shoulder-fired answer to armor. A promise that the American infantrymen would no longer be helpless against steel. The name sounded almost harmless. Bazooka. Now the distance closes. Dust clouds rise. A panzer silhouette crests the slope. The soldier kneels, exposed, far closer than doctrine ever intended. He flips a switch, takes aim, holds his breath. Nothing happens. In the seconds that follow, machine guns open up. Men dive for cover. The tank keeps coming. Unharmed, unstoppable, real. On fields like those near Kasserine Pass, the gap between American innovation and battlefield reality is about to be measured not in reports or memos, but in lives. And that moment leads directly to how this weapon came to exist at all. In September 1939, the modern battlefield changed faster than most armies could understand it. Across the plains of Poland, German armored columns moved with a speed and coordination unseen in the previous war. Tanks did not advance alone. They were paired with radios, engineers, motorized infantry, and aircraft. Each element supported the other. This was not merely mechanized warfare. It was synchronized shock. By May 1940, that shock hit Western Europe. In the forests of the Ardennes, German armor pushed through terrain French planners believed impassable. Within weeks, France collapsed. British forces escaped at Dunkirk, not because the system failed, but because it worked too well. The lesson was unmistakable. Massed armor, when used decisively, could shatter an army before it fully reacted. At the center of this thinking stood officers like Heinz Guderian. He argued that tanks were not infantry support weapons. They were the main weapon. Infantry existed to protect them, not the other way around. German doctrine emphasized speed, penetration, and relentless forward movement. Enemy strong points were bypassed. Resistance was isolated and destroyed later. Most armies watched. Few adapted in time. The United States Army entered the war carrying ideas shaped by World War I and interwar budgets. American doctrine still assumed that tanks would be countered primarily by other tanks, artillery, or prepared defensive lines. Infantry anti-tank weapons were considered secondary, useful but not decisive. In theory, American infantry would not face tanks alone. Reality would disagree. By 1941, German armored formations had smashed deep into the Soviet Union. Even when stopped, they inflicted staggering losses. Reports filtering back to Washington described infantry units overrun before they could reposition heavy guns. Field artillery often lacked time to deploy. Anti-tank guns were effective, but heavy, conspicuous, and difficult to move under fire. For an infantryman caught in open terrain, tanks were terror incarnate. The U.S. Army knew this problem existed. It simply did not yet feel urgent. America was not at war in Europe. Industrial mobilization was still ramping up. New weapons took years to design, test, and issue. That timeline would soon collapse. Pearl Harbor ended any remaining distance. As American forces prepared for deployment overseas, planners faced an uncomfortable truth. U.S. infantry divisions were likely to encounter German armor before American tanks or artillery could always support them. The terrain of Europe and North Africa, hills, villages, narrow passes, favored sudden armored contact. In those moments, infantry needed a weapon they could carry, aim, and fire on their own. The existing tools were inadequate. Anti-tank rifles had proven nearly useless against modern armor. Grenades required suicidal proximity. Mines were defensive, not reactive. Artillery required coordination and time. None solved the immediate problem of a tank appearing suddenly within a few hundred yards. German infantry had already addressed this gap. They fielded shape-charge weapons and magnetic mines designed specifically to kill tanks at close range. These tools were dangerous to use, but effective. American soldiers had no equivalent. By late 1941, U.S. intelligence assessments increasingly emphasized German armor's battlefield dominance. Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks were not invincible, but they were reliable, well-led, and supported by doctrine that assumed constant forward pressure. More importantly, German crews trusted their machines. They expected enemy infantry to break. American planners began to ask a direct question: what could a single infantryman do against a tank right now? The answer, when it came, would be rushed. It would be elegant on paper, and it would promise more than it could initially deliver. That urgency set the stage for a weapon born not from perfection, but from fear of being too late. The solution did not begin with a weapon. It began with a deadline. By early 1942, American planners understood that any infantry anti-tank answer arriving after first contact would arrive too late. U.S. forces were already deploying to the United Kingdom and North Africa. Combat was no longer theoretical. It was scheduled. At facilities like Aberdeen Proving Ground, engineers worked under pressure that left little room for hesitation. The requirement handed down was brutally simple. Create a weapon light enough for one man to carry, powerful enough to penetrate tank armor, and cheap enough to mass produce in months, not years. There was no time for elegance, only results. The concept itself was not new. Shape-charge warheads had existed for decades. European armies had already demonstrated that explosive energy could be focused to punch through armor regardless of projectile speed. What America lacked was a delivery system simple enough for infantry use. The answer was the rocket. Unlike traditional shells, a rocket did not need a heavy barrel or recoil system. It could be fired from a tube. The launcher could be light. The warhead could do the work. On paper, it was exactly what the Army needed. The first prototypes were crude. Electrical ignition systems ran exposed along the tube. Wires were fragile. Contacts were inconsistent. Cold weather interfered with batteries. Moisture caused misfires. None of these flaws stopped development. because there was no alternative. Testing was compressed. Modifications were made even as production began. Manufacturing contracts went out while engineers were still revising diagrams. The weapon was designated the M1 rocket launcher, later nicknamed Bazooka after a novelty musical instrument because of its shape. The name stuck. The consequences followed. Penetration tests were promising under ideal conditions, against stationary armor, at optimal angles, with perfect electrical contact. Reports emphasized potential, not limitations. There was little opportunity to simulate battlefield chaos. Dust, shock, stress, rushed aiming, and enemy fire. Training manuals followed the same pattern. Diagrams showed calm, soldiers kneeling at safe distances, firing clean shots at exposed side armor. Instructions warned of backblast, but understated the danger. Crews were taught to operate in pairs, though in combat that pairing was rarely guaranteed. Above all, the bazooka was presented as a tank killer. Crates of launchers and rockets were shipped overseas before many of the instructors had used one in live fire. Units received them alongside unfamiliar radios, new uniforms, and untested doctrines. For many soldiers, the first time they handled the weapon was on foreign soil. In North Africa, American troops prepared for their first large-scale confrontation with German forces. They knew the reputation of panzer units. They had seen the newsreels. They trusted that the equipment issued to them had been tested enough. What they did not yet understand was how little margin for error the bazooka allowed. The rocket's effective range was short. Accuracy dropped sharply beyond it. The warhead required proper impact angle to detonate effectively. Electrical ignition meant that a single faulty contact could turn a decisive moment into silence. None of this was hidden, but it was minimized. When the first American infantry divisions moved into contact zones, bazookas were distributed down to platoon level. Officers hoped they would deter tank assaults. Soldiers hoped they would work. The first real test would not come on a proving ground. It would come under machine gun fire against moving armor with lives depending on a single pull of a trigger. And that was where theory began to fracture. For the American infantrymen, the bazooka arrived as reassurance. It was long, awkward, and unfamiliar, but it meant he was no longer expected to face tanks empty-handed. Training emphasized confidence. Diagrams replaced experience. Instructors repeated a simple message: get close, aim true, fire once. Combat erased simplicity. Infantrymen quickly learned that using the bazooka required exposure. To hit a moving tank at effective range, a soldier had to leave cover, kneel or stand, and remain visible for several seconds. German tank commanders did not miss such movement. Machine guns were already scanning forward slopes. Infantry followed the armor closely. Many bazooka teams fired under extreme stress. Hands shook, sweat-soaked gloves, dust-clogged sights. Rockets struck at poor angles or failed to detonate at all. When nothing happened, there was no second chance. Some soldiers abandoned the weapon after misfires. Others carried it anyway, hoping the next round would work. The bazooka became both shield and burden, its promise intact, its reliability uncertain. The bazooka's weakness was not its idea, but its execution. Its electrical ignition system depended on fragile wiring running along the launcher's exterior. A single loose contact could stop the circuit. Batteries weakened in cold or damp conditions. Sand and grit interfered with connectors. Rockets sometimes ignited late, or not at all. Even when fired, success was not guaranteed. Penetration depended on striking armor at near perpendicular angles. Sloped armor reduced effectiveness. Side and rear shots were ideal, but rarely offered in combat. Frontal engagements were common and often disappointing. The bazooka was not useless, but it demanded ideal conditions in a battlefield defined by chaos. American intelligence had warned about German tanks, but reality still shocked. Panzer units operated with discipline and confidence. Armor advanced deliberately, covered by infantry and artillery. Tanks rarely charged blindly. They probed, fired, and adjusted. Crews trusted their protection, especially against infantry weapons. Within the broader structure of the Wehrmacht, tanks were never alone. Bazooka teams discovered that even if a shot worked, survival afterward was uncertain. Supporting infantry reacted instantly. Smoke, fire, and suppression followed. The psychological impact was immediate. The bazooka was supposed to change the balance. Instead, many soldiers felt the balance remained unchanged, steel still dominating flesh. Those first encounters did not yet signal failure. They signaled warning. A warning that would grow louder with each engagement as the weapon met combat conditions it had never truly faced. For American officers, the bazooka was not optional. It was policy. Field commanders were instructed to integrate it into defensive plans immediately. There was no alternative infantry anti-tank system available in sufficient numbers. Reports of malfunctions were noted, but they did not change orders. Tanks were coming regardless. Many officers understood the risk. They compensated by pairing bazooka teams with riflemen, machine guns, and artillery observers whenever possible. But combat rarely allowed ideal coordination. In fast-moving encounters, bazooka operators often found themselves isolated. Commanders faced an impossible balance: protect their men from exposure or give them a chance, however flawed, to stop armor. In that tension, the bazooka was used again and again because doing nothing was worse. German tank crews quickly learned what the bazooka could and could not do. After early encounters, reports circulated within panzer units. Crews noted the distinctive launch flash. They learned to identify bazooka teams before shots were fired. Once identified, those positions were prioritized. Most importantly, confidence grew. Tanks struck by rockets that failed to penetrate remained operational. Crews felt the impact, heard the explosion, and kept moving. Each survival reinforced belief in armor superiority. This did not make German crews reckless. It made them methodical. They advanced knowing that American infantry needed to expose themselves to fire. That knowledge shaped battlefield behavior on both sides. The bazooka carried more than explosive force. It carried responsibility. Every malfunction placed a soldier in mortal danger. Every misfire was not just a technical failure. it was a human one. Men were injured or killed attempting second shots. Others died because tanks were not stopped when expected. Soldiers did not blame engineers. They blamed timing. The sense that the weapon had been rushed, that combat had arrived before readiness, settled quietly into after-action reports and personal letters. The moral weight of sending men forward with unproven tools is difficult to measure. But in North Africa, it was felt immediately by those who carried the launcher and by those who watched tanks continue forward. All of these pressures converged when American forces faced their first major armored test. That test would expose every weakness at once. February 1943. Western Tunisia. The ground rises into broken ridges and narrow passes. Here, American forces meet German armor in sustained combat for the first time. The location will enter history as Kasserine Pass, but for the men on the ground, it is simply a maze of dust, rock, and fear. German units advance with precision. Tanks probe American lines, then strike where resistance is weakest. Artillery softens positions. Infantry follows close behind the armor, rifles ready. The attack is not reckless. It is deliberate. American infantry responds with what it has. Bazooka teams move forward under fire, seeking angles. They wait for tanks to present side armor. They fire from dangerously close distances, often well under 100 yards. Rockets streak out. Some detonate. Some do not. Some strike armor and fail to penetrate. In several engagements, bazookas bounce off frontal plates. In others, electrical failures leave operators exposed with nothing but a silent tube. German tanks do not stop. Machine guns rake forward slopes. Supporting infantry closes in. The psychological effect is devastating. Units that expected bazookas to blunt armor assaults watch tanks roll through positions. Defensive plans collapse. Orders become reactive. Infantry withdraws or scatters, leaving heavy weapons behind. Tanks exploit the gaps. German forces under commanders influenced by Erwin Rommel push aggressively, sensing weakness. American formations are outmaneuvered, outpaced, and outgunned. The bazooka, meant to restore balance, cannot do so alone. Reports from the front are blunt. Rockets fail to fire. Penetration is unreliable. Effective range is dangerously short. Tank crews remain confident. Infantry casualties mount. This is not a single failure. It is systemic. By the time American units stabilize their lines, the conclusion is unavoidable. The bazooka has not stopped German armor in the way planners hoped. It has worked in isolated moments, but not enough, not reliably, not decisively. The turning point is not a single explosion or breakthrough. It is realization, a quiet, collective understanding spreading through command channels and after-action reports. The weapon is not ready for the role it has been given. That realization will force adaptation on the battlefield and far beyond it. After the fighting subsides, the battlefield speaks in fragments. Burned trucks, abandoned guns, scattered equipment half buried in sand. Among it all, bazooka tubes lie discarded or damaged, some empty, some still loaded, never fired. American commanders begin compiling reports under pressure. These are not theoretical critiques. They are written by officers who have watched tanks advance through infantry fire. They list failures plainly. Ignition problems, insufficient penetration against frontal armor, excessive exposure required for operators. The tone is urgent but controlled. No one questions the concept. They question the timing. In the absence of reliable infantry anti-tank fire, American units adapt immediately. Artillery becomes the primary tank killer. Minefields are laid wherever possible. Engineers improvise obstacles. Infantry learns to withdraw rather than hold ground against armor unsupported. The bazooka is still issued, is still carried, but it is no longer trusted as the first line of defense. Higher headquarters receives the message quickly. The U.S. Army does not suppress the reports. It absorbs them. Engineers are ordered to redesign ignition systems. Warheads are reviewed. Training manuals are rewritten with harsher realism. Combat, not testing, has provided the data. By mid-1943, the Army acknowledges internally that the bazooka's debut has failed to meet expectations. Not because it is useless, but because it was rushed into a role that demanded perfection. This moment marks a turning point not just for the weapon, but for American doctrine. The belief that technology alone could compensate for experience fades. Combined arms coordination becomes the focus. Infantry, tanks, artillery, and air support are no longer treated as separate solutions. The bazooka's role narrows. It becomes a supplement, not a guarantee. As American forces regroup and prepare for future campaigns, the lessons of Tunisia remain vivid. They will shape every redesign, every tactical manual, every training course that follows. The smoke clears. The noise fades. What remains is understanding, earned at high cost, that war does not forgive haste. And from that understanding, consequences follow. The immediate aftermath of the North African engagements was measured in numbers that were stark and uncompromising. American units suffered over 6,000 casualties at Kasserine Pass alone, a combination of killed, wounded, and missing. Many of these losses occurred during encounters where bazooka teams engaged German armor, only to find their weapons failing at critical moments. Official reports cataloged each misfire, each bounced rocket, and each instance where exposure led to casualties. Soldiers' letters and diaries tell a parallel story. One infantryman described kneeling on a ridge, aiming at a panzer for only to watch the rocket fizzle. Another wrote of team members dragged down by machine gun fire while attempting a second shot. These first-hand accounts emphasize the terrifying proximity required to use the weapon effectively and the disillusionment that followed when expectations collided with battlefield reality. Commanders, too, absorbed the lesson. After-action reviews highlighted that while the bazooka could work under ideal conditions, its reliability under actual combat stress was dangerously inconsistent. Officers began adjusting tactics immediately. Bazooka teams were paired more deliberately, with cover providing riflemen and suppressive fire whenever possible. Operational plans shifted to rely more heavily on artillery and mines as primary anti-tank measures, while the bazooka became a supplementary tool rather than the centerpiece. The military also began collecting and analyzing mechanical data. Electrical faults, battery failures, and warhead misfires were documented in technical reports sent back to U.S. Ordnance and Aberdeen Proving Ground. Engineers noted that extreme heat, dust, and moisture, all omnipresent in Tunisia, were major contributors to malfunction. The rapid pace of deployment had left little time to address these environmental factors, and the reports stressed that design improvements were urgent. Yet, despite the setbacks, the weapon was not abandoned. Its conceptual strength, allowing infantry to engage tanks at short range, remained undeniable. Engineers and planners understood that a few critical modifications could transform the bazooka from a flawed promise into a reliable battlefield instrument. Batteries would be improved. Electrical contacts would be insulated. Warheads would be redesigned for more consistent detonation. Every adjustment was grounded in lessons painfully learned in combat. In essence, Tunisia forced a reckoning. The U.S. Army recognized that rushed innovation carried real human costs. Soldiers had faced tanks with insufficient tools, and the price had been measured in lives. But the same experience provided irreplaceable data that informed every subsequent design iteration and tactical adaptation. The Army now possessed a clearer picture of what worked, what failed, and what demanded immediate attention. From the ashes of misfires and destroyed positions emerged a hard truth. The bazooka had been rushed into service too soon, but it had also illuminated a pathway forward for American infantry to finally contend with enemy armor. By mid-1943, the U.S. Army had acted on the lessons of North Africa. The original M1 Bazooka was redesigned into the M9, with improved electrical circuits, more reliable firing mechanisms, and upgraded warheads capable of penetrating thicker armor. Training manuals were rewritten with a focus on realism. Soldiers learned the importance of proper positioning, effective angles of attack, and coordination with supporting units. No longer was the bazooka presented as a miraculous solution. It became a calculated part of a combined arms approach. Field deployment reflected these changes. In Sicily and Italy, infantry units carried the improved bazooka alongside artillery, mortars, and close air support. Engagements with German tanks now emphasized teamwork. One soldier fired while others suppressed enemy positions or covered retreat paths. The risk remained, but the weapon's reliability had improved enough to make it tactically viable. The lessons learned in Tunisia were embedded into every training exercise, every operational plan, every briefing. The human cost, however, left a lasting impression. Casualty reports from North Africa remained a stark reminder of the consequences of sending untested weapons into combat. Soldiers' letters and memoirs from the campaign referenced both fear and resilience. Many recounted moments of desperation when tanks overran positions, acknowledging the bazooka's initial failures, but also the improvisation and courage it inspired. The psychological impact of being armed with a tool that could fail was profound, shaping the mindset of infantrymen in all subsequent theaters. Strategically, the failure and subsequent improvement of the bazooka influenced U.S. military doctrine. The Army came to understand that technology alone could not substitute for experience, coordination, and battlefield adaptability. Future innovations, whether in rocket weapons, anti-tank artillery, or infantry support arms, would be evaluated with a balance between urgency and tested reliability. The bazooka became a case study in the hazards of rushing unproven weapons to frontline troops. Long-term, the weapon's legacy endured. The post-war era saw rockets and shoulder-fired anti-tank systems evolve directly from the bazooka's foundation. Designers applied the lessons learned in Tunisia to create more dependable, portable, and lethal infantry tools. Tanks would always dominate the battlefield, but infantry finally had a credible means of countering them. The story of the bazooka's early failure and its eventual refinement became emblematic of how necessity drives innovation and how human lives bear the cost of early mistakes. By the time American forces prepared for campaigns in Europe and the Pacific, the bazooka had transformed from a symbol of desperation into a practical component of infantry warfare. Yet the memory of those first, failing rockets lingered, etched into doctrine, reports, and the soldiers who faced German tanks unarmed but resolute. The stage was now set for reflection on what this event truly meant for soldiers, technology, and the future of combat. The bazooka story is not merely one of metal, explosives, or misfires. It is a story of urgency, of human courage, and of the collision between innovation and reality. In Tunisia, the weapon's promise exceeded its performance. Soldiers faced armored giants with tools that sometimes failed, forcing improvisation and endurance under fire. Lives were lost, lessons were learned, and doctrine was forever changed. History often celebrates technological triumphs. Yet the bazooka reminds us that invention alone does not guarantee victory. The human element, the soldier's training, fear, judgment, and adaptability remains decisive. A weapon can exist on paper as perfect, but until it is proven under fire, its potential is fragile. The North African campaign revealed this truth with brutal clarity. And yet, there is a quiet redemption in this narrative. From the failures emerged improvement. Electrical systems were reinforced, warheads refined, tactics revised. What once endangered American infantry became a reliable tool that allowed them to contest enemy armor in later campaigns. The lessons of haste, risk, and adaptation shaped not only the bazooka, but also the broader approach to American combined arms warfare. In the end, the story of the bazooka is a testament to the cost of urgency in war and the resilience of those who wield tools imperfectly, but with courage. It is a reminder that history is written not only in victories and defeats, but in the hard-earned evolution of strategy, technology, and human endurance. From the deserts of Tunisia to the forests of Europe, the echoes of those first rockets still teach us. Innovation is vital, but the measure of a weapon is in the hands and the survival of those who carry it.